Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm excited to moderate this panel discussion on cross-border government innovation. For long, public sector innovation research have focused on government capacity to innovate within its established territories and jurisdiction. In a world in a continuous change where problems have moved from complicated to complex, from local to global, governments have increasingly required to come together and find new solutions to shared issues. But how can governments innovate together and for the common good? What does it take to be successful at cross-border innovation? We have an impressive set of speakers to tackle these issues today. But before we start, we have prepared a short poll that should help us get going with this topic. It should appear now on the top right of your screens. And I invite you to respond immediately, and we will share the results of the poll later on. But now let me invite OECD Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Jeffrey Schlagenhoff, for some opening remarks. Mr. Schlagenhoff, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you all very much for joining us for this session on innovation through cross-border collaboration, governing global challenges. Since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, governments around the world have moved fast and unleashed a torrent of innovation at a pace and scale not seen in generations. However, the crisis has also exposed several shortcomings and reinforced pre-existing vulnerabilities. At the national level, it has highlighted a lack of preparedness amongst governments to tackle global challenges. Only half of OECD countries have dedicated institutions tasked with identifying novel, unforeseen, or complex crises. At a global level, the pandemic has highlighted how the increasing interconnectedness of countries may have made the world more vulnerable to common threats and has exposed weaknesses in international cooperation. Major challenges such as COVID-19, climate change, digitalization, and migration are not limited by jurisdictional borders. They demand collective action across countries and policy fronts. In my view, demonstrating that we are collectively able to tackle the global challenges of our time is essential to reinforce democracy and public trust in government. As witnessed during the pandemic, innovation is a key tool to address today's most pressing global challenges. However, government innovation efforts today are largely confined to national or local borders. Why is cross-border collaboration not happening more often? And how can we break this paradigm? The OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation and the UAE Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation have worked in partnership over the last year to determine which set of innovative practices governments can adopt to best support cross-border collaboration. Together, we have conducted extensive research, held a global call for innovations, and facilitated a number of open workshops on cross-border innovation. I'm pleased to be here with our partners from the Emirates to launch the first of a series of 3 reports on governing cross-border challenges. This report highlights that issues facing governments are increasingly complex and transboundary in nature. They require existing governance mechanisms to adjust and adapt. Governments are leveraging new structures, including innovative governance bodies, horizontal networks, and coordinated systems approaches in order to tackle these issues. It's these type of actions from governments, together with partners in industry and civil society, that help build a new foundation for multilateralism. International cooperation lies at the heart of the OECD's raison d'etre. We were reminded of this last week when ministers adopted the OECD's vision statement on the occasion of our 60th anniversary. I also feel encouraged by the groundbreaking agreement for a global reform of the corporate tax system by 136 countries last week under the inclusive framework established by the OECD. This will make our global tax system fairer and more adapted to the digital transformation of our economies. This reform was possible thanks to innovative and inclusive multilateral governance established by our Center for Tax Policy. I hope you will find the findings and conclusions of our first report useful and that they lead to a larger debate on how governments can come together and direct innovation for global collective action. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and it is with great pleasure that I pass the floor to Noura bin Kalban from our partner, the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey, for your words, and thank you everyone for joining the session. My name is Noura bin Kalban. I'm the project manager at the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation at the UAE's Prime Minister's Office. Just to tell you a bit about who we are, Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation was established in late 2014 to stimulate and enrich the culture of innovation within the government sector through the development of an integrated innovation framework. The goal is for innovation to become one of the key pillars of the UAE government in line with the vision of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, UAE Vice President, Prime Minister and ruler of Dubai, which aims to develop government operations and enhance the UAE's competitiveness, making the UAE one of the most innovative governments around the world. We truly believe innovative ideas make a real difference in government work. And for that, the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation focuses on 3 E's, excuse me, enable, experiment, and enrich. Through the enable pillar, we aim to build the capabilities of the public sector employees. Through the experiment, we test new ideas and hypotheses within the public sector. And for enrich, we not only focus on the public sector, but also on the private sector and the society at large to celebrate innovation with the entire society, especially through UAE Innovation Month. We're very excited with the work we've done with OPSI and the OECD team. We've been partners for a very long time now, and we hope you enjoy the report, the first of 3. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Noura, and thanks, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, for your opening words, reminding us how central is this topic of cross-border collaboration for the OECD, but globally for many of the member countries and non-member countries as well. I'll pass now the floor to Jamie Berryhill, who will give us a brief overview of the report, Achieving Cross-Border Innovation, Governing Cross-Border Challenges, that has just been issued. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marco, Noura, and Deputy Secretary General Swaganhop. I am just going to give you a very brief overview of the report and encourage you to check it out so we can quickly get to the main part of this discussion, which is the panel of experts that we've assembled for you today. As the Deputy Secretary General mentioned, we've been seeing increased levels of public sector innovation, including those that take a holistic and systems approach, cutting across silos and sectors. However, most of the efforts we have seen have really remained within the boundaries of individual countries or jurisdictions. So OPSI and our partners at the UAE Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation have worked together over the last year to try to sort out why is cross-border innovation not happening more often, and why is it so challenging? And looking at real practices, can we surface some success factors behind successful projects? So we are today are launching our series of reports on achieving cross-border government innovation. And it will be a series of 3 reports that we'll issue over the next several months. And we're really excited to launch today our first report, which is on governing cross-border challenges. And throughout the course of these 3 reports, we've really relied on extensive research that we've conducted here at the OECD. So reviewing all of the at least 100 different sources of different publications that are relevant to the topic, but then also focusing largely on real world practice. So surfacing through a global call for innovations crowdsourcing exercise, 104 different initiatives of actual cross-border collaboration going on today. 131 different cases that we identified through our research, and then held 3 global open workshops with experts and practitioners who have experience with cross-border collaboration and innovation from 43 different countries to really learn from their experiences and what they've learned in trying to conduct this practice. So just a quick overview on our Governing Cross-Border Challenges report. So our first report in the series. We broke it down into 3 separate themes that we really see as different modes of governance structures and different types of innovative governance mechanisms that we're seeing in governments today. And the first core theme that we're seeing is building cross-border governance bodies. So creating new formal top-down or center-out structures to harness the collective efforts of actors divided by existing borders to bring them together in a formal and structured way. We have a case study in our report on the Kvarken Council, which is the first legal Nordic cross-border entity, leveraging cross-sector collaborative methods to drive future-oriented opportunities. And we're also really excited to have with us today the Vice President of the Kvarken Council that Marco will introduce in just a bit. Our third theme in the report is on innovative networks tackling cross-border collaboration. So while the innovative bodies that we're seeing are very top-down and center-out, we're also seeing horizontal linkages and in more informality, informal type approaches being nurtured by governments, sponsored by governments, or just being participated in by governments who are ceding some control to other groups and serving as kind of a one player among many through global networks. The case study we have in our report for this theme is on the Open European Dialogue, which is a network of parliamentarians across Europe where members from different countries and even opposing parties can collaborate through experimental dialogue methods and foster shared learning, kind of regardless of their background. It's a neutral space for parliamentarians to come together from all different aspects and backgrounds of the European Union and non-EU countries within Europe. And then finally, our third theme that we break down in our first report is on exploring emerging governance system dynamics. So looking at cross-border collaborations and seeing how they're pioneering holistic new governance systems to foster new ways of working together across borders. So this includes kind of global governance mechanisms on co-financing, co-governance, co-project management, service design and policy design and service delivery. So really seeing ways different partners can come together and build kind of this connective tissue between themselves to drive tighter linkages so they can collaborate and push things forward together. The case study we have in our report for this theme is on the Borderlands Inclusive Growth Deal, which is a new governance system in North England and South Scotland that has secured almost 500 million Great British pounds in co-funding for a unified approach to inclusive growth in the region to focus on long-term success. So bringing together often many times small local jurisdictions together for collective impact. I won't go through all of them, but in our report, we surface a number of key challenges and key success factors, such as on the challenges side, trouble in addressing mutual needs and navigating different administrative boundaries, building trust and funding. And then over on the success factor side, things like garnering political support and agreeing on a common mission, strategy, and structures. So we try to break down each of these in the report to discuss how people and organizations are going about doing this. We provide 5 recommendations in the report on a variety of issues, including securing leadership, collective vision and strategy among all partners, putting into place the right enablers and dynamics, such as co-funding models and co-governance structures, sharing costs and benefits, but not having the expectation that necessarily everything's going to be equal. There's kind of a give and take with these things, and the goal is a net benefit for all players. And then ways on being a good partner. And building trust by fostering strong relationships over time, so over the long haul. Of course, like these are high-level recommendations, and they're really much easier said than done, but we're what we've observed so far. So in the coming months, after our 3 reports, we'll be working together on with experts and practitioners in an open way to develop a playbook that tries to break down these recommendations into more actionable and practicable guidance that governments can use. If I'd encourage you to check out the report yourself and read more about the details that we put together at cross-border.oecdopsi.org. And with that, Marco, I'll pass it over to you for the discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for these very good examples of cross-border innovation already happening. But why doesn't happen it more? What is holding it back? So this, I think, will be really the core of the conversation here today. Let me introduce you the panelists that we invited for this discussion. We have Professor Alex Stubb, Professor and Director of the School of Transactional Governance at the European University Institute. Welcome, Professor Stubb. Luke Wilson, Cross-Border Commissioner in the Government of Victoria, Australia. Thanks for joining us. Ms. Asa Agreen-Wickstrom, Vice President of the Kvarken Council and Vice President of the Regional Development Board of the County of Västerbotten in Sweden. Welcome, Ms. Wickstrom as well. And finally, Mariana Kartunen, Head of the International Regulatory Cooperation Unit here in the Public Governance Directorate at the OECD. Welcome you all, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Now, before we start the conversation, I might ask to show the results of the poll so that we can take a look at them, and just remind you that the question was to try to test and get a sense of the knowledge in the room of cross-border innovation in the public sector. And results seems to confirm that there are quite some people that have previous knowledge. I'm an expert and actively take part in cross-border innovation project, around 36%, and others that have some knowledge, but they've never really taken part of any cross-border innovation so far, another 33%. So I think a very advised attendee group for the sessions. And maybe I'll start with our panelists and turning to them to see if these results are somehow shocking or get you by surprise. Why cross-border innovation is not known more, or why cross-border innovation is not more experienced. What is your view? What is your vision? Perhaps I'll start with Professor Stoop first to introduce himself and tackle this.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Marco, and thanks for the question, and thanks for the poll. I think one of the main reasons is that cross-border is something that people don't very often talk about. You know, it's what I call the typical Brussels syndrome. So everything that's good, everything that's bad comes from Brussels, everything that's good is thanks to you. And when cross-border cooperation somehow succeeds, it's very difficult to sort of portray that in terms of communication or media. You know, our take, and I'm heading the School of Transnational Governance. So basically, governance beyond borders. Our thinking is very simple. It's that decisions nowadays don't take place in a vacuum. My son, who is 17, is here on his autumn break from high school from Finland. And he asked me this morning when we walked over to the university that why are you called the School of Transnational Governance rather than the School of International Governance? And I sort of stopped for a while and I said, well, it's because international means something between states, but transnational goes beyond that. You mentioned it earlier, as did Jamie when presenting the report. It's really about public actors, private actors, NGOs, private companies, civil service, government, academia, journalists, all being involved in sort of this decision-making pie. So I sort of understand the result of the poll, and that's because the term cross-border or the term transnational doesn't necessarily ooze sex appeal yet. But after these three reports, it will.
Thank you for this view, and it certainly gives us the sense of the challenge that we are having here today to make it perhaps sounds more sexy than what it is. I'm turning to Mr. Wilson for his views on this, and he's a cross-border commissioner, so he's this bread and butter of the day. Why this cooperation doesn't happen that often? Is there's a problem in communications, a problem understanding what it really is? Luke, over to you.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. And I think I am interested in the results of the poll, that they do perhaps give an indication as to the answer to that question, that the lack of knowledge or perhaps there's a sense of cross-border both as problems but also opportunities. But in my role, which is largely dealing with subnational borders, but the trends and the the common causes do seem to be quite in common with the cross-national border issue, that we are, our governments become very focused on almost their inner selves. In our case, they'll be based in a capital city. The borders around that can vary. And so it's not necessarily front of mind, but one of the other things I've found in my work is quite a lot of government agency people have actually come to me and said they don't feel that they have the permission to look across border, that it's almost, if any effort or time or investment in looking across the border and learning across and collaboration is almost frowned upon, as if, why are you doing that? That's not your KPI. You stick with the business in your jurisdiction, and that's not universal, but it's a very strong thread that I've come across. And so, and one of the jobs we've tried to take on then is to try and find ways to break through that and say, actually, it is worth investing. But it does mean and I was interested in the presentation, it does mean often you need to go to the political leadership or the senior leadership of the agencies and convince them of the value of that collaboration. Because we do get a sense that sometimes there's enough understanding that there's an appetite forms, that people are very shy and don't feel that they have that permission to act.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. That resonates also partly with what we've seen in our research. And I'm turning now to Ms. Wikström to see what, based on her experience, if that holds true. Is that there a sense of no permission to look at issues that really goes beyond borders, or is there anything else in this?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this seminar, because this is one of my key issues that I'm always working with. I think soon I will get to your question, but from my point of view, it's about innovation, and innovation as such isn't always easy to detect if it doesn't appear in form of a new thing. Public sector is very much about services to the people, and cross-border innovation is sometimes both easier and as well as trickier to do due to different regulations in the countries. I think innovation isn't only the new things or gadgets, but also when smart people see new fields of utility for products or services we already know. For instance, take Spotify as an example for this. They saw that music and the CDs could combine into streaming services. The music wasn't new, and nor was the record players, but the way we then wanted to consume the music and where we wanted it. And I think much of this also applies for innovation in the public sector, as well as in the private sector. In my region, in the north of Sweden, we have a long tradition of finding each other to cooperate, simply because we are not so many people in our regions and we have long distances. And for instance, our collaboration and cooperation in the Kvarken Council, where I'm a vice president for the moment, celebrates 50 years next year. And during the last years, we have increased our cooperation between the region of Västerbotten in Sweden and the region of Österbotten in Finland. And just last year, we chose to take our regional collaboration one step further, and we launched the first Nordic EGTC, European Group for Territorial Cooperation. And I think one of the keys here is trust, simply a sense of not being fooled by a neighboring region, and the ability to be generous when new establishments chooses a place to locate, instead of being grumpy and envious. Well, easier said than done, of course, sometimes, but I think in the long run, the region will benefit from this. And some of the results of this is our brand new environmental friendly ferry between Umeå, Sweden and Vasa in Finland that launched in August this year. And also the establishment of the Nordic battery belt that now is forming in Finland, Norway and Sweden to meet the demand and upcoming need for all kinds of clean battery cells to the rapidly growing global market. And we're also working together to find new ways to electric aviation in our region. And some of these examples is a result of a sense that it is possible to be innovative and find new solutions to our region's problems and possibilities. and that the public and private sector can work together and be in it for the long run. So I think I agree with the co-speakers here also. Not many know so much about cross-border innovation or work as it is, but maybe soon will be more noticed. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Bistrom. And I'm turning to Mariana for her views and perspective from an OECD international regulatory sort of cooperation point of view. Are these results of this poll shocking? What's your take on how much of this innovation and cross-border cooperation really happens?
Thank you, Marco. And it's always hard to come after others who've already said everything. But to me, this poll result actually highlights one very interesting trend, is that the question, the most participants here seem to be already convinced about the importance of cross-border collaboration, right? So it highlights this kind of polarization that there is between either you're convinced that cross-border collaboration is important, you're more in favor of multilateralism, of international collaboration, etc., or you're more worried about sovereignty issues, you're more following nationalistic perspectives and more worried about your own country's priorities and needs. And from that perspective, I think that this survey result obviously highlights the very difficulty of the whole debate about, as others were saying, the difficulty to convince people on the need for cross-border collaboration, because precisely this is not actually a political issue. We see it that the economy didn't wait for governments to be ready to collaborate to go global. The virus didn't wait for the government to be ready to become a pandemic. Climate change is certainly not going to wait for anyone. So the need for cross-border collaboration to be really fully ingrained within governments and from our perspective, rulemaking, policymaking, etc., really needs to be fully systematic and can't be a political preference, let's say.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this view. I'd like now perhaps to dig a little bit more into the results of our research and the report that Jamie has presented today. And one of the aspects that the report covers is the different challenges and success factors when it comes to the governance structures that are really underpinning cross-border collaboration. What the panelists think of the biggest issues you've seen or directly faced in collaborating across borders, and how can we make progress? How can we overcome them? Perhaps starting with Professor Stubb for his views on this.
Oh my God, I'm in a tough position, almost as tough a position that Mariana was earlier, so it's first and last. Okay, just a few sort of random thoughts, and you might know that my background comes from academia, civil service, and politics, and most of what I've done throughout my life has actually been cross-border. So telegraphically, one issue is culture. So the understanding of culture and language of the other in any form of cross-border cooperation. I'm sure you've seen that in the OECD as well. We always joke about national stereotypes, but when we worked in the OECD for 5 years, we can confirm that the national stereotypes are very much there. Probably Mariana and myself are slightly different Finns than you are used to. I don't know if OPSI is the normal Swede, but we all have different ones. The second one is that we are actually a little bit tribal when we work either in the public sector or the private sector. In other words, we have a tendency to believe that whatever we work with is the most important one. And I think Luke put it very well and nicely that it's not part of our key KPIs to do, cross-border or cross-sectoral work. And if that's the case, then it's very difficult to sort of convince your bosses or whoever is in charge to say that, this is what we should do. Let me give a final point, and this is a third point, and this is a little bit of a provocation, and it comes from some of the ideas put forward by Mark Leonard in his latest book on sort of the unmaking of peace, if you will. But the basic idea is this, that the instruments that globalization has given us in terms of internet, in terms of free trade, in terms of cross-border cooperation, in terms of technological advancements, everything that we think that is really good about globalization and should have brought us together into more cross-border cooperation, let me throw it the other way around. As a matter of fact, right now, it's driving us apart. And communication is a big part of this. So social media was supposed to bring us together into a global community and speak the same language. Well, what is it doing at the moment? It's basically polarizing us. The same thing goes for international news. A lot of people are more interested basically in local news than international news. So what I'm trying to say that the cross-border for us and transnational seems natural, and it's great to work with it. But as a matter of fact, for those who are involved in the poll or who are working on a local community level, somewhere in the region of Kvarken, it's not a natural thing to do. So I'll just throw these 3 points.
Thanks for this. And I'm turning to the panelists. This is very interesting. Is there anything natural in cross-border collaboration that we're missing and that we need to make sense of? And perhaps we can start from that. And Mr. Wilson, any views on this and globally on the success factors and challenges of cross-border collaboration?
Yeah, I do. I think that that issue of cultural difference, and it might surprise you to learn that even in a single country between states, there are still sufficient cultural differences that we still experience the same pattern, at least in this country, which is sometimes unfortunate. But if I go, I mentioned earlier the question of permission, but one of the things we do see as a challenge, and I think it can come naturally, but it needs an investment, is that building of trust. And that's not to imply it's coming from a position of people mistrusting each other. It's just that it's often coming from a position where people just don't know each other. They just don't know their counterparts, and they've, for whatever reason, they've never had cause or permission perhaps to reach out. And so one of the things we do encourage, particularly those agency leaders, is that the value of making that investment in those relationships, knowing your counterpart is the way we put it for the staff, is that if you can build that investment and you're not building it at the time because there's necessarily a specific issue on the table, you want that investment to those relationships to be ongoing and have ongoing value. And we do see that if we can get agencies to move down that road, a lot of the benefits then start flowing a little more naturally, because once that relationship exists, it's just a lot easier to pick up the phone or to find the information or to ask the question, or and it's not done in an environment where there's a really acute burning issue necessarily. So we do think there's a natural element to that, but it does often need that first prod to get that investment moving.
Thanks for this. And Haza, does this resonate with your experience? The building trust, creating connections, building relationship. Is that what is really the driver of it, or there is something more?
I think it boils down to relationships, no matter what you do in personal life or in the politics or in the businesses. It's the relationships and how you can communicate with others. And we see during the years of our regional collaboration in the Kvarken Council, the problems we most often have seen is the national levels in both our countries. We have experienced some resistance or lack of interest from the national level during our work to build a new ferry between Sweden and Finland. But to get the results then, we needed to be smart and consistent. And we noticed that the interest from the EU was larger for the motorways of the sea. So we took advantage of that and used their interest to get the national levels in Sweden and Finland on board. And now the ferry is launched and running, and after many years of hard work and dedication, and a belief that it could be done, and is a vital part for the connectivity in our region. And that's one of the issues we have faced during the years. But I think morally, you need to start with a common problem or area that you have defined for collaboration. If you have a concrete or limited thing to start the cooperation within, it's easier than just a large vision of common understanding. And it's about the cultural thing also, because as Luke just said, it can be more different between locally in Sweden than it is between Sweden, Västerbotten and Österbotten in Finland. So that's a part of it too. And you need to start the work in cooperation to see which obstacles you meet and sort out in what order you need to solve them, I think. And again, here trust is the key, and your relationships to each other and the common goal of what we want to achieve. It's about a bit like, the cat in Alice from Wonderland. When Alice asks, would you tell me please which way I ought to go from here? And the cat answers, well, that depends on where you want to go. And Alice says, I don't much care where. So the cat replies, then it doesn't matter which way you go. And there you have it. A common goal is necessary to get results, we think.
I see, Alex.
I just wanted to come in. Yeah, if I may, to Åsa, this actually reminds me, I was working at the European Investment Bank from 2017 to 2020. And now I recall that the EIB gave a 70 million euro loan for the ferry from Finland to Sweden. And this is what I sort of encourage all local leaders to do. I mean, if you can't get your national authorities and government excited about something, then go the European way. Go to Brussels, or in this particular case, go and get the money from Luxembourg, and whoops, suddenly the national leaders are pretty interested in it and start supporting it as well.
Thanks for this. Over to Mariana. This question of trust and building on cultural differences, how that combines with a perspective that also this cross-border collaboration need to be solidly based on legal artifacts, the legal issues that need to be dealt with, and cooperation that need to be established, some formalities. How does that work in your space?
Well, precisely, I think that this issue of trust and difference of culture comes out a lot in our survey to OECD governments as part of the regulatory policy outlook that was just issued last week. That's where we asked basically how, first of all, who governments collaborate with, what kind of fora do they participate in, and interestingly as well, who, when they measure impacts of their regulations across the border, so who are my regulations affecting, they measure impacts unshockingly with their neighbor governments. So all of this, I mean, this is very unsurprising data that a cooperation, international regulatory cooperation happens mostly with neighboring countries, with regional partners. But what is a bit more surprising still, in my view, from this data, having been following these surveys for already, I think it's been 10 years, there's still very little cooperation and similar kind of measuring of impacts with countries that go a bit further than neighbors. And yet, typically, international trade is completely fragmented, and there's a lot of trade with countries who are at the other side of the world. There's so the geographic proximity, which is indeed usually, as we know, between Finland and Sweden, or I'm sure Luke knows with neighbors in New Zealand and the region, that the geographic proximity is a good indication of cultural proximity and therefore also of trust. And so how can we build this trust with countries further away? Because clearly this is not happening almost at all for now, or very little, let's say. And on that, I can get to later, I guess.
Thanks, Mariana. Thanks for this. Now, moving into how this partnership gets implemented, we talked a bit about the vision, about the importance of a shared vision, shared values, the sense of a mission. But what are, in your views, the barriers, the institutional, financial, and legal barriers that might limit effective cross-border collaboration in your experience, in your case? Perhaps starting with Aza and her case specifically.
Well, thank you. I think what we have experienced is after forming the first EGTC in the Nordic, we see that it has become a lot easier to be a formalized partner in our different projects, as well as finding financing and funding. Before this, the inventiveness and the way to decisions about various projects was longer. There were plenty more people and instances you had to persuade. But still, the Kvarken Council has fostered more than 100 projects during the years, and so it isn't impossible, but now it's become easier. And of course, the membership of the EU since 1995 has made it easier for both Sweden and Finland to find new ways of collaborating and finding funding for that. When we can use our common platform in the EU, it's easier to get things done, when the projects don't have to compete with priorities of investments on the national level, which of course can be quite different from our different countries. And I come back to the relationships and the culture, because I think if we compare our mentality in the north of Sweden and the north of Finland, it's quite similar in most ways. If you compare it to North Sweden and south of Sweden, it could be bigger differences over there. So I think it's a common goal, and you know each other from the beginning, and relationships takes time, and you have to be aware of that too. Thank you.
Thanks, Aza. And turning to Luke for his views and what makes really this partnership hit the ground and be operational. What are the challenges that you've faced and you encountered?
Yeah, look, one that we do come across, and it's kind of disappointing when we do, but the funding metrics are a very common barrier that we do strike, and it sometimes comes up with my jurisdiction and our neighbours. So these are geographically neighbours, where the way the funding metric will work is if there's an investment that generates a benefit on both sides, the Treasury will actually net that off. They don't want to know that there's a benefit on the other side. And of course, people who live in the border area are sort of just sort of shake their heads really and say, my goodness, what an opportunity you are missing. Because actually the smart thing to do would be to co-invest and get a much more efficient outcome. But from the very distant centres, the first instinct sometimes is to do the complete opposite. Which it still astounds me that I have to tell people that exists sometimes, because it just amazes. But that's for some of the areas we deal with, that funding metric and the way that works does present a barrier. Again, it's not always the case, and there are some things we work on that aren't particularly about funding in any case, but that's definitely one that is there, and that is one where often a more formalised arrangement is needed to sort of break the nexus of that.
Thanks, Luke. Mariana, Alexander, do you want to add on to this points about the implementation of cross-border, what makes it happen?
Mariana, haluatko mennä ensin? Do you want to go first?
Please.
Okay. I just come back to the notion that also was highlighting earlier, and to a certain extent Luke a second ago as well, that is the personal touch. You know, it's all about human interaction at the end of the day. I mean, you know, we can be as Monet as we want and talk that nothing is possible without humans, nothing is lasting without institutions. That might be true. But at the end of the day, it's basically the social contract between two individuals who are dealing with it. And I know that there are a lot of, economists who are firm believers in rational choice and quantum data and the rest of it. It's all exciting and fun and good and important for understanding the world. But when it comes to cross-border implementation, you know, there are no algorithms that are doing it yet. So that being the case, I think it's all about the human contact. And I think, to be honest, one of the problems that we've had during COVID-19 is that the younger generation hasn't been able to network or connect in the way in which they used to. And I think we're in desperate need for this, especially now when the cross-border stuff is probably not as interesting or vogue as it used to be. I'll just give my final point on this, which is a little bit separate. I think in the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, with the end of the Cold War and the collapse of communism, that was very much the time of liberalization and markets and cross-border and the rest of it. So the pendulum swung, if you will, to the extreme in cross-border cooperation. Whereas now we've seen this sort of swing backwards towards the state and what would be, at least in public discourse, called less cooperation. You know, we saw that with not only 9/11, but then especially the financial crisis, the immigration crisis was all about bringing up borders. And now in COVID, we've had this crunch on cross-border cooperation, which is obviously then at the end of the day led to you know, distribution problems and supply problems, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I'm hoping that the pendulum will start swinging back towards more cooperation, but that needs individual contact.
Mariana.
Kiitos. Just one final thought to add to everything else that's been already said. I would say that another thing to make cross-border collaboration actually possible is personal and also institutional, but starting from personal engagement to be, or readiness to change how things are done. So I think we're all very, it's easier to go your own way. It's much easier to do things the ways you've always done it, and it'll necessarily have transaction costs to cooperate, to reach out to somebody else and to learn another way of doing. But then at the same time, there's no way you can do everything alone. So from that point of view, I think there's a clear benefit of accepting that there's new way of doing things, that this new way of doing things is actually looking elsewhere, learning from others, and doing with others. And this should become then less and less costly, let's say, less and less burdensome as you take the habit of doing it. And this, I take the personal experience because I think it reflects well what's true for governments as well.
Thanks, Mariana. I'm seeing on the side a lot of good questions coming from the floor, from the public. I might pick a couple of them. One particular is intriguing. Give it to you, as is, who are the best knowledge brokers for scaling successful innovations across borders? think it's very interesting. Who want to pick on that? Either Luke or Asa at the start.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't say the best. It's quite presumptuous, I think. It's not in our nature. But we obviously have been doing this for quite some time now. As I said, we celebrate 50 years of collaboration between Umeå and Vasa, Sweden and Finland, next year. So we have done most of the mistakes we might share with you or others who are interested. So our door is always open. And we see now that the most concrete example of our joint collaboration is the new ferry. You can actually go on the ferry. It's very there. You can touch it also. So I think this is a concrete example of our collaboration, and how we did manage to get this in place. That is something we proudly and happily share with all the rest of you. So I'll start with that.
Yep.
Yeah, I love this question, because I think the best people are the people who live and deal with the border. You know, if you want to find how to solve the border, there'll be a rich vein of ideas already there. Now, if they're adjoining borders, then that means dealing with people most likely in that geography. But if they're not adjoining borders, if they're distant, then go straight to the people who already trade across those borders, or you know, have whatever dealing through that, because that we just find that over and over, that the people on the border have probably already solved the problem, or they already know the solution because they've tried all the other, they've been through the whole process over a long period. So, yeah, the number one piece of advice to people, particularly, you know, in the centre, who are often far away, is talk to the border, talk to the people at the border. And, you know, 95% of the time you'll find the solution is somewhere in there.
Thanks, Luke. And Alexander, anything you want to contribute in this issue of scaling innovation across borders? What makes it possible or not?
Well, my slightly ideological view is freedom. You know, that's what you usually need. I think what you usually need are three things for innovation to prosper. You know, one is regulation. You know, some people believe that we don't need regulation. As a matter of fact, you do need regulation in any free society, and that sort of regulatory framework needs to be conducive then to you know, free enterprise and the rest of it, whether it's cross-border or inside the country. Then of course you can start getting into ideological debates about, you know, tax incentives and immigration and the rest of it. But that's a you know, different story. The second thing you need is finance, money, you know, in that I think some people have always been skeptical about public banks, the likes of the EIB or the World Bank or the EBRD or the AIIB. IFOs in general, and I don't think they should be, because they're pretty good at crowding in money. So at the EIB, the classic example I give, it goes into a project with roughly 50%, and because it's a AAA rated bank ad infinitum, because it's owned by 27 sovereigns, in other words, member states, then boom, you immediately know that this is going to be a safe investment, and the private sector and private banks you know, come in. And then from these two things follow the third most important thing, which is, you know, innovation itself. Now, on Luke's example, on the people at the border know the best. Finland has 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia. I'm not always sure that I'm going to go and ask our border guards what the best way of cooperation is, but that's a different story.
Mariana, if you want to add on that, or no?
Yes, thanks. I think another, I mean, I would, of course, it's not always the case, but I would add that it's dialogue with the diversity of people, maybe not always just at the border, but also typically, and here comes the reality of global governance being so diverse, that's no longer just international organizations, for example, have all the information on innovation. It's not only governments who have all the information, but it's also, I mean, clearly it's companies who know what the impacts on the ground of regulation is. It's NGOs who know what the impacts on consumers and environment, etc. are. So it's really a very diverse set of actors that goes well beyond just the traditional actors of globalization. And there's a lot of work to do for a really cross-pollination of this information to happen.
Thanks, Mariana. I'm particularly interested, and I'm seeing that also our public is interested in that, in picking on the implication for the public sectors in terms of the skills that the public servants need to have to do more, to develop and run cross-border cooperation. There's a question from Frederick that really points to that. How do we accept to invest in making public servants able to develop and run cross-border cooperation and international learning? Perhaps would Luke start picking on this based on his experience, of course?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because in the end, you do need the public servants right across to be able to do this. You can't. It's not going to work if it's just in the hands of a small number of people. So you do want to normalize it. As I've said earlier, I think part of it is about permission, but I think also that the way we do it, and I admit I do have the advantage of dealing with geographic borders, neighbouring borders, but we actually we try and bring people out to the border and sit with the community who live and work in that border, because part of the issue is if you are a long way from it, or you're a long way from the problem, and whether it's geographical or any other measure, it's just hard to recognise. It's hard to know where to start. So we do bring them to the border in our case and have them work with people who already experience the issues that we're dealing with and put them in a problem-solving environment that looks like that, which helps them feed off it, but it also gives them a sort of like a safe place to practice. So they're not just sitting afar making judgments, which, to be honest, if they do it that way, it's it's kind of potluck as to whether any good ideas come out. So, but what it does take is it takes that permission and it takes that investment to be recognised. And if you don't have that, it's just very hard to. It's only a very small number of people who will leap at it really naturally. Thankfully, though, there are such people around.
Alpha, would you develop on this or have another angle to that question?
Well, I agree with most of what Luke said, because the further you are away from things, the easier it seems to solve them for other people. So you need to be at the border or in the context where the problem is, I say. But then again, at the same time, you need to convince people who have the authorities to make decisions to actually see the problem. So it's a two-way street, I think. We do so in the regional level and the municipality level in Sweden. We have quite a few, or should I say, relatively few people who are specialized in cross-border and international collaboration and cooperation with the others. And this is something that we politically and we are very agree on this issue in the region and the municipalities, because we are in the northern part of Europe and far away from Brussels. And the further away you get from Brussels, the distance is quite significant, I'd say, both mentally and physically. So I think with this, you need to allow people to get their skills in working internationally and cross-border, because it doesn't, it isn't a skill you're born with. You have to learn how to do this. And again, relationships and trust is key even here, I think. Thank you.
Alexander or Mariana, any additional views on this question of skills for cross-border collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, sure, I'll say a couple of words on it. I mean, this is nothing new to the people on the screen and most probably people listening to us and certainly people at the OECD, but internationalism or cross-border, it's also the question of identity. And I think, also is completely correct in pointing out that, it's something that you don't grow into. So, if you have someone who is obviously born local, with a local identity, with a local language, far away from the international realm, he or she is not naturally going to start to cooperate. It's something that you need to learn how to live into. And two additional points on this. One of the problems that we have, I think, in the public discourse is media today, in the sense that we don't have as many foreign correspondents as we used to have. So a lot of journalists are writing their stories from their desktop and basically just looking at different sources from other sort of web pages, et cetera. And that makes, I think, communication quite complicated to a certain extent. And I'm not blaming this on journalists, but the truth is that if you don't have that sort of broad space of conversation about cross-border, then it's difficult to push through. I mean, if the debate on the ferry to Kvarken is only about how much do you have to pay for it on the Swedish side versus how much you have to pay for it on the Finnish side, then it's problematic. The second issue, which we're all grappling with at the moment, is, of course, algorithms and the type of information that they feed us. So if you and I are cross-border type of people, and we keep on surfing from morning to evening on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and Google about cross-border stuff, well, the algorithms start feeding that type of an identity to us. But the opposite is, of course, true. If you're anti-immigration, if you're a nationalist, if you are anti-international, and that's why I'm afraid that cross-border is important, but we are in a polarized society, and that's what makes it a bit more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Mariana, is anything to add onto this? Or?
Yes, I would say that also for to coming back to the idea of building a capacity of public servants, I think there's importance of building or having carrots and sticks. I mean, having the carrots, so the incentives, and that's, I think that's exactly where we have the problem that's been mentioned. That was just mentioned by Alexander right now about when you're not convinced, it's against your ideology or it's against your identity to collaborate, then it's very difficult. But then if you also have a combination of sticks, so to speak, so that it's ingrained in the law, it's ingrained in the regulation or in somehow international standards or whatever the source, but that there is a mandatory requirement for you to consider cooperating, then it's a reality. I think it's very difficult to go about it without it being ingrained in some kind of action like that.
Thanks, Mariana. We're getting close to the end of the sessions, but there are a number of very good questions. In fact, I picked the last one on this. How can we factor in uncertainty in cross-border collaboration in terms of uncertainty that characterize cross-border issues? How do we deal with that? And we spoke about creating better cultural linkages, creating trust between the partners that do cross-border. Is there anything else that needs to be done to in the face of uncertainty? Who wants to pick on this one first? I'll then go with Alexander. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, sure. Yeah, sorry for the painful silence and shyness coming from the panel. We're all like that. I think it's an extremely good question. Let me give you two answers. One is a direct answer, one is an example. The direct answer is let's just learn how to live with uncertainty. I mean, that's the world that we live in. I think there are too many people who sort of think that we live in some kind of a utopia where basically things are going to happen as we expect and everything is going to be always smooth sailing. No, I mean, life is constant crisis management. And I think in the blurb or intro forward to the report, I started by saying that we human beings have a tendency to, number one, over-rationalize the past, number two, over-dramatize the present, and therefore, number three, underestimate the future. And I think if we try to avoid this, then we're already quite far away. Now, on the uncertainty thing, I mean, look, COVID-19 has been a global pandemic, continues to be so, and causes a lot of uncertainty. But how do we deal with uncertainty? Well, we deal with it by doing cross-border stuff. Look, COVID-19, look at the different cross-border players involved in trying to solve the crisis. I'll just telegraphically give a few. The state, in other words, one of the 200 nation states around the world. Regions, international organizations ranging from the WHO to the UN, to the European Union, even the OECD. Big pharma, in other words, the private sector. Scientists, in other words, those people who invented CRISPR technology in the early stage. The transport sector and value chains to make sure that we have enough masks, if we have enough vaccines, etc. Procurement, the people who were procuring the different vaccines. Trade, finance, information and disinformation, NGOs such as Gavi. So what I'm trying to say is that, when you're in an uncertain situation, the last thing you want to do is basically to close shop and turn inward. That's the natural inclination of a democratically or otherwise elected politician. But what we really need to do if we want a solution to uncertainty is go cross-border.
That's pretty good and convincing speech, Alexander. I'll let the other panelists perhaps respond to that and see if there's anything else to add to in a face of uncertainty. What's best to be done, Luke or Asa?
I do like that approach, and I think because I think it's quite right. If in the face of uncertainty, probably the one risk is delude yourself to think that you can get it right, but at least have a lot of options, do a lot of learning, and the point of the cross-border collaboration is that there is someone else to learn from, and someone else to share risk with, and someone else to pool resources with. So I do like Alex's response there.
Asa?
Well, thank you. Alex said it so well, so I don't need to say the same things again. But I think the COVID pandemic, if anything, has shown us how close we are linked together. Maybe we didn't think so before the pandemic, but we are. We see just in the Kvarken region, it's a big issue to collaborate with each other when you can't meet, or now you can, but you couldn't for another year and a half ago. So this is important things, and I think common people just want to get by their day, their work, their life. It should just run smoothly, and to be able to do this, you need collaboration and cooperation. And the cross-border is one of the ways we can do this in. So relationships all over again.
Mariana?
Yes, I would precisely. I think Alexander said exactly the real. I agree with it 100%. I mean, working at the Public Governance Directorate, it's difficult for me to say otherwise, but for me, it's really the institutions and the public sector, let's say, all the institutions, as well as the laws, regulations, constitution, etc. The democracy that's there, and all the rest can be uncertain because, I mean, it's true that during COVID, we've seen a lot of shortcomings. There's been really a lot of issues already with the vaccines. Right now, it's still completely unequal how it's gone around the world, but where we do see effective states and effective democratic processes and effective institutions, we see better results. So I'm tempted to be in that direction.
Yeah, thanks, Mariana. This has been a really incredibly rich discussions, and it can continue more. And I see that a lot of interest in going forward, also from our audience. Now, in the remaining few minutes, one of our goal of this conference has been to not only to encourage discussion, but also some deliberate actions by governments and leaders moving forward. So, in 1 minute or less, could you share with us one thing that you're personally committed to doing differently as we move forwards and beyond the recovery? Perhaps I'll go with Luke first this time.
Yeah, look, it's something that we hopefully do different coming out of the recovery or coming out of the COVID, the acute period. But one thing that I need to do and to put back into our government is to just get people to ask that border question more regularly. And that's the way we'd like to frame it. I mean, it's almost a bumper sticker that has a lot beneath it. But if we can just get people asking that border question as they go about their agency work, we just think there's a lot of gains. There's a lot of gains for the whole jurisdiction, certainly for the people who live in the border, but it's not limited to that. So I think pushing people to ask that border question and doing that myself is my commitment.
Great, thanks, Luke. Aza, what would you committed to doing?
Well, I'd say do what you can with what you have where you are. And this is a normal state of mind for those of us who live in the northern part of Sweden, but also recognize that you can do more if you do it in cooperation. So hopefully we will soon be able to fully recover from this COVID pandemic throughout the world. And going forward, I see the need for deeper cooperation, and the exchange of best practices is necessary. So I am committed to work even more in finding new areas of cross-border cooperation to create the best conditions for growth in our region. So thank you.
Thanks, Azan. Mariana, what is your commitment?
Well, I think if it's just a personal commitment, I would say I would start, I commit to always just listening, because that's the first step to then learning and then potentially opening the doors for collaboration. So I think that's where I would go.
Okay, thank you. Alexander.
Okay, I have a personal commitment and a general commitment. The personal one is probably not good for cross-border cooperation, but I'm trying to stop shaking hands. You know, one thing's coming out of this. One of the best things coming out of this pandemic is that I haven't had a cold in two years, because I haven't shaken hands with anyone. So that's mine. I'm sorry, I know it might be a little bit rude, but the more proper one is I'm going to continue working here at the School of Transnational Governance and basically teaching at any given time roughly 80 master students and 60 fellows about the virtues of transnational cooperation and governance. And I hope that when they do the poll, they will certainly understand what things cross-border and transnational mean.
Thank you to you all for your honesty and your commitment. We're not going to check on that in a few months' time. So, and any commitment is a good one. I really want to thank all of you for taking the time to join this conversation and commenting on the report with us. It's been a really valuable time. We got a lot out of the work that UCD is leading from different angles on cross-border collaboration is continuing, and we'll soon issue a couple of reports on this innovative dimension of cross-border collaboration. And we're happy to keep you appraised of that movement. I'd also like to thank all the team behind the organization of this session, the supports that has been provided to make it possible, and Jamie Berryhill, who is the author of the report that has been presented. Has done an incredible work for over the past few months. Thanks to you all, and I hope you will continue following on the conference, and if you have time, of course. But particularly Luke, thanks for being with us so late at night, and thank you all. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.